The crack of the gavel echoed through the crowded auction hall, silencing the murmurs that had filled the stifling air of Willow Creek, Colorado in the summer of 1875. Rebecca Lawson stood trembling on the wooden platform, her chestnut hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders despite her attempts to appear composed. This wasn't how she had imagined her life would turn out, being auctioned off to pay her late father's debts, treated like cattle rather than a 20-year-old woman with dreams of her own. Next item, the auctioneer, a portly man with a handlebar mustache and sweat-stained shirt, announced with practiced enthusiasm. Miss Rebecca Lawson, daughter of the late Jonathan Lawson, educated in Boston, can read and write, skilled in household management and teaching. He paused, eyeing the crowd of mostly men who had gathered for the town's monthly auction. Would make a fine wife for any gentleman seeking a respectable woman. Bidding starts at $50. Rebecca's cheeks burned with humiliation as she stared out at the sea of unfamiliar faces. Some leered openly, others looked at her with pity, but all of them assessed her worth like she was nothing more than a mare at a horse sale. Her father's gambling debts had left her with nothing: no home, no money, and apparently no dignity. $50, called a voice from the front row. It belonged to Harold Winters, the local saloon owner, a man known for his wandering hands and cruel temperament. 60, countered another voice, this one from Wilbur Peterson, a rancher at least 30 years her senior, whose 3 previous wives had all died under mysterious circumstances. Rebecca's heart sank further with each bid. This was to be her fate, sold to the highest bidder for a life of servitude or worse. She closed her eyes briefly, remembering her father's promises that they would build a good life here in the West after her mother's death. Those dreams had died with him 3 weeks ago, leaving her at the mercy of his creditors. 75, called another voice, one that made her stomach turn. Jasper Quinn, the local brothel owner, was stroking his beard thoughtfully as he appraised her. $100, came a new voice from the back of the room. The crowd parted slightly, revealing a tall figure leaning against the doorframe. Rebecca squinted against the shaft of sunlight that streamed in behind him, making out the silhouette of a broad-shouldered man wearing a Stetson hat pulled low over his eyes. 110, Winters countered, turning to glare at the newcomer. The auctioneer's voice rose with excitement. I have $110 for Miss Lawson. Do I hear 120? $200, the stranger said firmly, pushing away from the doorframe and taking a step forward into the light. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. $200 was a small fortune in Willow Creek. Rebecca got her first clear look at the man as he moved closer. Dust from the trail still clung to his denim pants and leather vest. His face was partially hidden beneath several days' worth of stubble, but his eyes, a startling clear blue, met hers directly. He couldn't have been more than 28 or so, with a quiet confidence that set him apart from the other men. $200, the auctioneer repeated, his voice rising with excitement. Do I hear 210? The saloon owner and the brothel keeper exchanged glances, both shaking their heads. Even Wilbur Peterson, who owned one of the largest cattle spreads in the territory, remained silent. 200 going once, the auctioneer called, raising his gavel. Going twice. Rebecca held her breath, sold to the gentleman in the back for $200. The cowboy raised his hand in acknowledgement, claiming her proudly in front of the entire assembly. Relief washed over Rebecca, though it was quickly tempered by uncertainty. She had no idea who this man was or what he intended for her, but at least she had been spared from the known horrors of Winters or Quinn. The auctioneer gestured for her to step down from the platform as the crowd's attention turned to the next item up for bid, her father's pocket watch, one of the few possessions that had not been seized immediately after his death. Rebecca gathered her skirts and carefully descended the 3 wooden steps to where the stranger waited. Up close, she could see the trail dust and weariness etched into his tanned face, but there was a kindness in his eyes that gave her a glimmer of hope. Miss Lawson, he said with a slight nod, his voice low and resonant. I'm Dane Yates, Mr. Yates, she replied stiffly, unsure of the proper protocol for addressing the man who had just purchased her. I suppose I should thank you. A flicker of something amusement perhaps crossed his features. No need for that just yet. We should get your papers sorted and be on our way. My horse is getting restless. He guided her toward the auction clerk's table where he counted out the money from a leather pouch. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, pushed a document across the table. Sign here, Mr. Yates. This transfers all claims on Miss Lawson to you, including any future debts or obligations. Rebecca watched as Dane's hand moved across the paper, his signature bold and clear. The clerk then handed him another document, and this one gives you legal guardianship, considering the lady's age and circumstances. Rebecca felt a renewed surge of humiliation. At 20, she was being treated like a child, passed from one guardian to another. That won't be necessary, Dane said, pushing the second document back. Miss Lawson is of age. She'll be making her own decisions from now on. The clerk blinked in surprise but didn't argue. As you wish, sir. The first document is binding enough. Dane folded the paper and tucked it inside his vest before turning to Rebecca. You have belongings you need to collect. Just a small trunk at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, she answered, still trying to make sense of what was happening. Everything else was sold. Then let's get your trunk. My ranch is a half-day's ride from town, and I'd like to make it before dark. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand lightly upon it. As they stepped out into the harsh sunlight of the main street, Rebecca was acutely aware of the curious stares from townspeople gathered on the boardwalk. Mr. Yates, she said quietly as they walked, I feel I should understand what's expected of me. Are you looking for a housekeeper? A teacher for children? Or, she couldn't bring herself to voice the third option, though it hung in the air between them. Dane stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Miss Lawson, I bought your contract to save you from men like Quinn and Winters, nothing more. Once we reach my ranch, you'll have choices about what you want to do next. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly followed by suspicion. In her limited experience, men rarely did something for nothing, especially not something that cost $200. Why would you do that? You don't know me, a shadow crossed his face. Let's just say I recognize an unjust situation when I see one. Now, which way to Mrs. Holloway's? They retrieved her trunk without incident, though Mrs. Holloway made little effort to hide her disapproval at seeing Rebecca leave with a man she didn't recognize. The older woman had been kind enough to let Rebecca stay on after her father's death, but her charity had not extended to forgiving the 2 weeks of unpaid rent. You take care now, Miss Lawson, Mrs. Holloway said stiffly as Dane loaded the small trunk onto his horse. These are dangerous times for a young woman without proper protection. I'll be fine, Mrs. Holloway, Rebecca replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Thank you for your concern. Dane helped her mount his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, before swinging up behind her. The proximity was uncomfortable. She had never been this close to a man who wasn't her father, but there was no alternative if they were to reach his ranch before nightfall. As they rode out of town, Rebecca felt the stares of the townspeople boring into her back. In the span of a month, she had gone from being the respectable daughter of a businessman to an object of pity and gossip. And now she was riding off with a stranger whose intentions, despite his assurances, remained unclear. The first hour passed in silence as they followed a well-worn trail leading west out of Willow Creek. The landscape gradually changed from scattered farms to open rangeland, with the Rocky Mountains rising majestically in the distance. Despite her apprehension, Rebecca couldn't help but be moved by the wild beauty surrounding them. Are we getting close to your ranch? She finally asked when the silence became unbearable. We're about halfway there, Dane replied. You'll see it once we cross the next ridge. It's not much compared to some of the big spreads, but it's good land with plenty of water. How long have you lived there? Going on 5 years now. Came out from Missouri after the war with not much more than the clothes on my back and built it up piece by piece. Rebecca considered this. You fought in the war, cavalry, Union side. His tone made it clear he didn't care to elaborate further. And now you're a rancher, trying to be. Got about 60 head of cattle, a few horses I'm breaking for the army, and enough crops to keep me fed through winter. Alone. She asked before she could stop herself. She felt rather than saw his smile. Not entirely. Got a ranch hand, Joe Buffalo, who helps with the livestock. He's Cheyenne, came with the land in a manner of speaking. His people had camps there long before any white settlers. And Mrs. Whitaker comes from the next property over twice a week to help with cooking and washing. This was somewhat reassuring. At least there would be other people around. What about you, Miss Lawson? Your father brought you west from Boston. Rebecca nodded, then realized he couldn't see the gesture. Yes, after my mother died last year, he had business interests here, or so he claimed. I think he was running from debts even then, but I didn't know it at the time. I'm sorry about your father, Dane said quietly. Thank you, it was unexpected. She swallowed hard, pushing away the memory of finding him slumped over his desk, an empty whiskey bottle and his revolver beside him. The official story was that his heart had given out, a kindness from the town doctor who understood what suicide would mean for a young woman's reputation. They crested a hill, and Dane pulled the horse to a stop. There it is, Yates Ranch. Below them stretched a modest but well-kept property. A sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney stood near a creek that wound through the valley. A barn and corral were visible to one side, with fenced pastures beyond. It was nothing like the grand cattle empires she had heard about, but there was something appealing about its simplicity and the evident care that had gone into building it. It's lovely, she said, and meant it. As they approached, Rebecca noticed smoke rising from the cabin's chimney, and a figure emerged onto the porch, a woman in her 50s with gray streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. That's Mrs. Whitaker, Dane explained. I sent word ahead that I might be bringing someone back from town, but I didn't explain the circumstances. Rebecca tensed. What will you tell her? The truth, that you needed help and I was in a position to provide it. He paused. Unless you'd prefer a different explanation. No, she said after a moment. The truth is fine. They dismounted in front of the cabin, and Mrs. Whitaker approached, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression curious but not unfriendly. Mr. Yates, she greeted him, then turned her attention to Rebecca. And this must be your guest. Mrs. Whitaker, this is Miss Rebecca Lawson. She'll be staying with us for a while. Rebecca extended her hand. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Whitaker. The older woman's handshake was firm. Likewise, Miss Lawson, I've prepared supper and aired out the spare room. I trust that's satisfactory, Mr. Yates. Perfect, thank you. Dane hefted Rebecca's trunk from the horse. I'll take care of Star and be right in. Mrs. Whitaker led Rebecca into the cabin while Dane headed toward the barn with his horse. The interior of the home was simple but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, a solid wooden table with 4 chairs, and several well-worn but clean furnishings. Rebecca could see 2 doors leading off the main room, presumably to bedrooms. The spare room's through there, Mrs. Whitaker said, gesturing to one of the doors. It's small, but it should serve. There's fresh water in the pitcher if you'd like to wash up before supper. Thank you, Rebecca said, suddenly aware of how dusty and disheveled she must appear after the auction and the long ride. Mrs. Whitaker hesitated, then lowered her voice. Miss Lawson, I don't mean to pry, but, well, Mr. Yates has never brought a young woman home before. If you're in some kind of trouble, Rebecca appreciated the woman's concern. Mr. Yates helped me out of a difficult situation in town today. I'm afraid my father recently passed away, leaving considerable debts. Understanding dawned in Mrs. Whitaker's eyes. The auction. I heard they were settling Jonathan Lawson's estate today. She shook her head in disapproval. That's no way to treat a lady, no matter the circumstances. Well, you're better off here than with most who might have bid on your contract. You know Mr. Yates well. 5 years I've been keeping house for him, 2 days a week. He's a good man, quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but fair and honest. Works harder than any 3 men I've known. Before Rebecca could inquire further, the door opened and Dane entered, bringing with him the scent of horses and the outdoors. Mrs. Whittaker moved efficiently to the stove where several pots were simmering. "Supper's ready whenever you are," she announced. "Beef stew, cornbread, and apple pie for dessert. It smells wonderful," Dane said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. He ran a hand through his dark hair, which was damp with sweat from the day's heat. "Miss Lawson, would you like to freshen up before we eat?" Rebecca nodded gratefully and retreated to the spare room with her trunk. It was indeed small, containing only a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a mirror and water pitcher. But it was clean and private, two things she had feared she might never have again after her father's death. She washed her face and hands, smoothed her hair, and changed into the cleanest dress she had available. It was a simple blue cotton, worn at the cuffs and hemline, but it was the best she could do. As she re-entered the main room, she found Dane and Mrs. Whittaker already seated at the table. "Please join us," Dane said, standing until she took her seat. The meal was delicious, the best food Rebecca had eaten since before her father's death. Conversation was sparse at first, but Mrs. Whittaker gradually drew Rebecca out with questions about Boston and her education. Dane said little, but Rebecca noticed that he listened attentively to everything she said. After they had finished the apple pie, Mrs. Whittaker stood and began clearing the dishes. "I should be getting back to my place before it gets too dark. My Henry will be wondering where I've got to." "Thank you for staying late," Dane said, "and for preparing the room. It was no trouble." She turned to Rebecca. "I'll be back the day after tomorrow. If you need anything before then, don't hesitate to ask Mr. Yates." After Mrs. Whittaker had departed, an awkward silence fell over the cabin. Rebecca remained at the table while Dane moved to stoke the fire against the coming evening chill. "Mr. Yates," she finally said, "I appreciate everything you've done for me today, but I still don't understand why." $200 is a significant sum. Dane straightened and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Miss Lawson, I've seen what happens to women in your situation out here. Most end up in places like Quinn's with no way out. I couldn't stand by and let that happen when I had the means to prevent it." "That's very noble," she said cautiously, "but it doesn't explain why you would help a complete stranger at such cost." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I had a sister," he finally said, his voice low. "Rose. After our parents died, we had no one. I went to fight in the war, thinking the army pay would help support her. While I was gone, she found herself in circumstances not unlike yours." Rebecca's heart sank, guessing where this story was heading. "By the time I returned, she was gone, died in a brothel in Kansas City. She was 18. His jaw tightened. "I've always wondered if things might have been different if someone had stepped in to help her. So when I saw you on that auction block today—" "I understand," Rebecca said softly, "and I'm truly grateful, but I don't want to be a burden or a charity case. I need to find a way to support myself." Dane nodded. "There's a school in Copper Creek about 10 miles from here. They've been looking for a teacher. With your education, you might be suitable." Or Mrs. Whittaker mentioned that the general store in town needs help with bookkeeping. "Those both sound promising," Rebecca said, relieved that he seemed to understand her desire for independence. "In the meantime, you're welcome to stay here. The spare room is yours for as long as you need it. All I ask is that you help around the ranch where you can, cooking, mending, whatever you're comfortable with." "That seems more than fair." Dane looked at her thoughtfully. "There's one more thing you should know. People will talk. A single woman living at a bachelor's ranch, even with Mrs. Whittaker coming by regularly, it will cause gossip." Rebecca sighed. "After today, I suspect my reputation in these parts is already beyond salvaging. Perhaps. But you should be prepared for it nonetheless. I appreciate the warning." She stifled a yawn, the emotional and physical exhaustion of the day suddenly catching up with her. Dane noticed. "You must be tired. We can talk more tomorrow. I'll be up at dawn to see to the livestock, but please sleep as long as you need." "Thank you, Mr. Yates, for everything," he nodded once, almost awkwardly. "Good night, Miss Lawson." Rebecca retreated to the small bedroom, where she changed into her nightgown and slipped between the clean sheets. Despite the strange surroundings and the uncertainty of her situation, she felt safer than she had in weeks. As she drifted off to sleep, she realized that for the first time since her father's death, she was looking forward to tomorrow. True to his word, Dane was gone when Rebecca awoke the next morning. Sunlight streamed through the small window of her room, suggesting it was well past dawn. She dressed quickly in a simple brown skirt and white blouse, then made her way to the main room. A fire burned low in the hearth, and she found coffee still warm on the stove. There was also a plate of biscuits covered with a cloth. A note beside them read simply, "Help yourself, back by midday." DY. Rebecca poured herself coffee and took a biscuit, stepping outside to enjoy the morning air. The view from the porch was breathtaking, rolling grasslands stretching toward distant mountains, the creek winding through the property, and cattle grazing peacefully in the nearest pasture. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and wildflowers. After finishing her breakfast, Rebecca decided to make herself useful. She explored the cabin thoroughly, taking stock of what needed cleaning or organizing. The main room was tidy enough, but the kitchen area could use some attention. She rolled up her sleeves and set to work, scrubbing the stove and organizing the pantry shelves. By mid-morning, she had the kitchen gleaming and had started on the dusty windows when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking out, she saw not Dane but another rider, a Native American man on a painted pony, leading a second horse laden with supplies. Rebecca hesitated, uncertain whether to retreat inside or greet the visitor. Before she could decide, the man dismounted gracefully and approached the cabin, removing his hat as he came up the steps. "Miss Lawson," he asked, his English perfect but accented. "I am Joe Buffalo. Mr. Yates said you would be here. This must be the Cheyenne Ranch hand Dane had mentioned." "Yes, I'm Rebecca Lawson. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Buffalo," he nodded, seeming pleased by her formal address. "Mr. Yates asked me to bring these supplies from town and to tell you he will be delayed. A calf is stuck in the North Creek. He says not to wait lunch for him." "Thank you for letting me know. Can I help you with those supplies?" Together they unloaded the packhorse, bringing sacks of flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples into the cabin. Joe moved with quiet efficiency, his manner respectful but reserved. "Have you worked for Mr. Yates long?" Rebecca asked as they arranged the supplies on the newly organized pantry shelves. "Since he came. This was my family's hunting ground before white settlers. When they divided the land, Mr. Yates offered me work and a place to stay. He is a good man who keeps his word." "That seems to be the consensus," Rebecca said with a small smile. Joe studied her for a moment. "The town talks about you." Rebecca stiffened. "I'm sure they do. They say Mr. Yates bought you at auction. That's technically accurate, though not the whole truth." She met his gaze directly. "My father died in debt. His creditors put me up for auction to recover what he owed. Mr. Yates purchased my contract to save me from worse fates, but he's made it clear that I'm free to make my own choices." Joe nodded thoughtfully. "Among my people, we sometimes adopt those who have lost their families. Perhaps it is similar." The comparison hadn't occurred to Rebecca, but there was something comforting in the way Joe framed it. Perhaps it is. After Joe left to tend to other ranch duties, Rebecca found herself alone again. She prepared a simple lunch of bread and cheese, then decided to explore the immediate surroundings of the cabin. She didn't want to wander too far, aware that she knew little about the potential dangers of the area, but she was curious about her temporary home. The barn was her first stop. Inside, she found it well maintained with stalls for 4 horses, though only 2 were currently occupied: Dane's chestnut stallion, Star, and a dappled gray mare. Both horses nickered softly as she approached. "Hello there," she said, offering her hand for them to sniff. The mare nuzzled her palm gently, and Rebecca smiled, remembering the riding lessons she'd taken as a girl in Boston. Those had been on docile, well-trained mounts in a controlled environment, nothing like these powerful Western horses, but the basic principles would be the same. Beyond the barn, she discovered a small vegetable garden that appeared somewhat neglected, with weeds sprouting between rows of beans, corn, and potatoes. This, at least, was something she could help with immediately. She found gardening tools in a shed and spent the next hour weeding and watering. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't notice Dane's approach until his shadow fell across the garden plot. Looking up, she found him watching her with an expression of surprise and something that might have been approval. "You didn't have to do that," he said, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow. Rebecca straightened, brushing dirt from her skirt. "I wanted to make myself useful. Besides, I've always enjoyed gardening." "Well, I appreciate it." "The garden's been neglected since the calving season started. Mrs. Whittaker does what she can, but she has enough to manage with the house." "How's the calf?" Rebecca asked, remembering Joe's message. "Free and back with its mother. Just took longer than expected." He glanced toward the cabin. "Have you eaten?" "I had some bread and cheese earlier. I can prepare something for you if you're hungry." "I wouldn't mind some coffee if there's any made." They walked back to the cabin together, and Rebecca busied herself stoking the fire and putting the coffee pot on while Dane washed up at the basin by the door. "Joe brought the supplies you sent," she mentioned as she worked. "I organized the pantry while you were gone. I noticed. The place hasn't looked this orderly since, well, ever." He accepted the cup of coffee she offered and took a seat at the table. "Thank you," she joined him, cradling her own cup. "It's the least I can do. Joe told me a bit about how you came to own this land." Dane nodded. "It was luck, mostly. The previous owner died without heirs, and the bank was selling it cheap. Joe's family had lived in this valley for generations before it was parceled out to settlers. Didn't seem right to push him off the land entirely." "That was generous of you," he shrugged. "It was practical. I didn't know the first thing about ranching out here. Joe taught me everything from how to find water during drought to which grasses fatten cattle fastest. I'd have failed within a year without him." Rebecca appreciated his candor. "Have you always wanted to be a rancher?" "Not particularly. After the war, I just wanted space and quiet. Tried my hand at prospecting for a while, but that life's too uncertain. A man needs roots." "And a family." The question slipped out before she could consider its impropriety. Dane's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Most men do, I suppose. Never seemed to be in the cards for me." Rebecca felt a curious pang at his words, but pushed it aside. "Well, I'm grateful that your path led you to Willow Creek yesterday. As am I." He finished his coffee and stood. "I should check on the south pasture before dark." "Will you be all right here alone?" "Joe lives in a cabin near the creek, but he's probably out with the herd. I'll be fine. Is there anything I can prepare for supper?" "There's salt pork in the pantry, and you saw the garden." "Whatever you can put together would be welcome after trail rations and Mrs. Whittaker's leftovers." After Dane departed, Rebecca explored the pantry more thoroughly and decided on a meal of salt pork with the potatoes and beans she had harvested while weeding. She wasn't an accomplished cook. They'd had servants in Boston, and Mrs. Holloway had provided meals at the boarding house, but she knew the basics. By the time Dane returned at dusk, she had a hot meal waiting and the cabin filled with the homey sense of cooking. He stopped in the doorway, something like wonder crossing his face as he took in the scene: the set table, the steaming food, the freshly swept floor. "This is a sight for sore eyes," he said, hanging his hat and washing up. "Smells good, too. I hope it tastes as good as it smells." "I'm afraid I don't have much experience with cooking." They ate together, and Rebecca was relieved when Dane took a second helping without prompting. The meal wasn't fancy, but it was filling and hot. "Tomorrow I can take you into Copper Creek if you'd like to inquire about the teaching position," Dane offered as they finished eating. "It's their supply day anyway, so I need to make the trip." "I'd appreciate that. The sooner I can find employment, the better." "There's no rush," he said, meeting her eyes. "You're welcome here as long as needed." "Thank you, but I've been dependent on others' charity for too long already. I need to stand on my own feet," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I respect that. We'll leave after the morning chores." The next morning dawned clear and warm. Rebecca rose early, determined to prove herself useful, and had breakfast waiting when Dane came in from the barn. They ate quickly, and soon they were on horseback heading toward Copper Creek. Rebecca rode the gray mare, which Dane informed her was named Willow. The horse was gentle but responsive, and Rebecca found her confidence returning as they rode side by side along the trail. "You ride well." Dane observed. Did you learn in Boston? I had lessons as a girl. My mother insisted it was a necessary accomplishment for a young lady, though I rarely had the opportunity to ride outside of the school grounds. Willow seems to have taken to you. She can be particular about who rides her. She's a lovely horse. Do you raise them as well as cattle? On a small scale, I break and train a few each year for the army or for ranchers who don't have the time or skill for it. It supplements the cattle income. As they approached Copper Creek, Rebecca felt her anxiety rising. This would be her first appearance in public since the auction, and though it was a different town from Willow Creek, news traveled fast in these parts. Copper Creek was larger than Willow Creek, boasting a proper main street with a dozen businesses, including a hotel, 2 saloons, a church, and the schoolhouse. People nodded greetings to Dane as they rode past, their curious gazes lingering on Rebecca. They tied their horses at the hitching post outside the general store, and Dane helped Rebecca dismount. The schoolhouse is just down the street, he said. Would you like me to accompany you, or would you prefer to speak with them alone? I think I should go alone. It might seem more professional that way, he nodded. I'll see to our supplies and meet you back here in an hour or so. Good luck. Rebecca smoothed her skirts and made her way to the schoolhouse, a modest white building with a small bell tower. School was not in session due to summer break, but she hoped to find someone with authority to discuss the position her luck held. As she approached, an older gentleman was just exiting the building, locking the door behind him. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. Can I help you, miss? I hope so, sir. I'm Rebecca Lawson. I understand there may be a teaching position available for the fall term. The man's eyebrows rose slightly. You heard correctly. I'm Frederick Thompson, chairman of the school board. Are you inquiring for yourself or someone else? For myself, sir. I was educated in Boston and have experience as a teaching assistant. Mr. Thompson studied her thoughtfully. A Boston education, you say? That's impressive. We don't often get teachers with such qualifications out here. Most of our schoolmarms are local girls with basic literacy. Rebecca felt a surge of hope. I can provide references from my former headmistress, though it might take some time to receive a response by mail. That would be helpful. Why don't you step inside and we can discuss the particulars? For the next half hour, Rebecca answered questions about her education, teaching philosophy, and experience. Mr. Thompson seemed increasingly impressed, especially when she demonstrated her knowledge of mathematics and literature. Well, Miss Lawson, I must say you appear highly qualified. The position pays $30 a month with lodging in the small cabin behind the schoolhouse. The term begins in September and runs through May, with breaks for harvest and Christmas. That sounds very fair, Mr. Thompson. There is, however, one matter of concern. He cleared his throat awkwardly. We require our teachers to be of impeccable moral character. The children are impressionable, you understand, and the parents are quite particular. Rebecca's heart sank. You've heard about my circumstances. Word travels, especially unusual news. A young lady being auctioned to settle debts, then purchased by a bachelor rancher. It raises questions. She lifted her chin. Mr. Yates acted out of kindness, nothing more. He saved me from a terrible fate and has been a perfect gentleman. I've been staying in his spare room while seeking employment with his housekeeper as chaperone. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. I believe you, Miss Lawson, but perception matters in a small community like ours. What would you suggest? He considered for a moment. If you could find more suitable accommodations until the school term begins, perhaps with a respectable family in town, and if Mr. Yates would be willing to provide a character reference as your employer rather than your benefactor. The board might be persuaded to overlook the unusual circumstances. It wasn't an outright rejection, which was more than Rebecca had dared hope for. I understand. May I have some time to make these arrangements? Of course. The board meets again in 2 weeks. If you can address these concerns by then, I believe you have an excellent chance of securing the position. Rebecca thanked him and left the schoolhouse with mixed emotions. The teaching position would be perfect. It offered independence, respectable work, and use of her education. But the conditions presented challenges. Where would she stay until September? And how would Dane feel about being recast as her employer rather than her rescuer? She found him waiting at the general store, loading supplies into saddlebags. His expression brightened when he saw her. How did it go? Promising but complicated, she replied, explaining the situation as they prepared to leave town. Dane listened thoughtfully. Mrs. Whittaker has a spare room. She might take you in until the school term starts. Would she be willing? I wouldn't want to impose. She's mentioned before that her house feels empty since her children moved away. I think she'd welcome the company, especially with her husband often away on cattle drives. And the other matter, about presenting yourself as my employer, Dane shrugged. If it helps you get the position, I'm happy to say whatever's needed. The truth is, you have been working for your keep, cooking and tending the garden. Relief washed over Rebecca. Thank you. I'll speak with Mrs. Whittaker when she comes tomorrow. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Rebecca couldn't help wondering what would happen once she secured the teaching position and moved permanently to Copper Creek. Would she see Dane again? The thought of not seeing him regularly left her with an unexpected emptiness. As they approached the ranch, smoke was visible rising from the cabin's chimney. That's odd, Dane said, frowning. Joe wouldn't go inside without me there. They approached cautiously, but as they drew closer, Dane relaxed. It's Mrs. Whittaker's wagon, he said, pointing to a vehicle hitched near the barn. She must have come a day early. Sure enough, Mrs. Whittaker emerged from the cabin as they dismounted, wiping her hands on her apron. There you are. I was beginning to worry. We went to Copper Creek, Dane explained. Is everything all right? You don't usually come on Thursdays. Everything's fine. Henry got called away to help with a neighbor's barn raising, so I thought I'd come early this week. She turned to Rebecca with a warm smile. How was your trip to town, dear? As they entered the cabin, Rebecca explained about the teaching opportunity and the complications involved. Mrs. Whittaker listened sympathetically, then beamed when Rebecca mentioned the possibility of staying with her. I'd be delighted to have you. The house is far too quiet with just me rattling around in it, and it would solve your reputation problem nicely. No one would question you staying with a married woman of my age. Are you certain it wouldn't be an imposition? Not at all. In fact, I insist. We can move your things tomorrow, and I'll help you settle in. With that decided, Rebecca felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The path to independence was opening before her, thanks to the kindness of these people who had been strangers just days ago. That evening, after Mrs. Whittaker had left and supper was finished, Rebecca and Dane sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance. I should thank you again, Rebecca said finally. You've changed my life in ways I couldn't have imagined when I stood on that auction block. Dane kept his eyes on the distant horizon. You're the one doing the hard work. I just opened a door. Nevertheless, I'm grateful. She hesitated, then added, I'll miss this place when I move to Mrs. Whittaker's. He turned to look at her then, his expression unreadable in the fading light. You're welcome to visit. The garden will need tending and Willow would miss you. Just Willow. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The corner of his mouth lifted in a small smile. Maybe not just Willow. Heart fluttering inexplicably, Rebecca looked away, focusing on the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. I'd like that. The next morning, Mrs. Whittaker arrived early with her wagon to transport Rebecca's trunk to her home. The small cabin where Rebecca would be staying was indeed charming, a tidy one-room structure behind the main house, originally built for Mrs. Whittaker's daughter before she married and moved to Denver. It's perfect, Rebecca said, taking in the simple furnishings: a bed, a small table with a chair, a chest of drawers, and a rocking chair by the window. I can't thank you enough. It's my pleasure, dear. And this way, you'll be close enough to visit the ranch regularly while maintaining your reputation for the teaching position. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca fell into a comfortable routine. She spent mornings helping Mrs. Whittaker with household tasks and afternoons riding to the Yates ranch to tend the garden and assist with whatever needed doing. Dane was often busy with ranch work, but they would share a cup of coffee or a meal when their paths crossed, and Rebecca found herself looking forward to these brief encounters more than she cared to admit. The day of the school board meeting arrived, and Rebecca, dressed in her best skirt and blouse freshly pressed by Mrs. Whittaker, and pinned her hair in a neat, professional style. Dane had offered to drive her to town in his wagon, presenting a more respectable image than if she arrived on horseback alone. As they approached Copper Creek, Rebecca's nerves threatened to overcome her. "What if they still refuse?" she asked quietly. "What will I do then?" Dane's steady gaze met hers. "Then we'll find another solution. The general store still needs someone for their books, or there might be opportunities in one of the larger towns, but I have a feeling you won't need those alternatives." His confidence bolstered her spirits, and by the time they reached the schoolhouse where the board was meeting, Rebecca felt ready to face whatever came. "Would you like me to come in with you?" Dane asked as he helped her down from the wagon. She considered the offer. "Yes, I think that would help. Mr. Thompson mentioned wanting a character reference from you as my employer." Inside, they found the 5 members of the school board seated at a table at the front of the classroom. Mr. Thompson introduced Rebecca to the others: the mayor, the town doctor, the minister, and a stern-looking woman introduced as Mrs. Hargrove, a former teacher herself. "Miss Lawson, we understand you've made some changes to your living arrangements," Mr. Thompson began after the introductions. "Yes, sir. I'm now boarding with Mrs. Whittaker, a respected married woman in the community. And Mr. Yates has kindly agreed to speak to you about my character and work ethic during my time at his ranch." All eyes turned to Dane, who stood tall and spoke with quiet authority. "Miss Lawson has been in my employ for several weeks now, helping with household management and record keeping. She's proven herself to be diligent, intelligent, and of impeccable character. Any community would be fortunate to have her as a teacher." Mrs. Hargrove leaned forward. "Mr. Yates, there have been rumors about how Miss Lawson came to be in your employ. Would you care to clarify the situation?" Dane met her gaze directly. "Miss Lawson's father died in debt. When his estate was being settled, I was in town and recognized that she had skills that would be valuable to my operation. I offered her a position, which she accepted. There's nothing more to the story than that." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either, and Rebecca was grateful for his tactful response. The board members exchanged glances, and Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "Well, given Miss Lawson's qualifications, her current respectable living situation, and Mr. Yates's endorsement, I see no reason why we shouldn't proceed with the appointment. Does anyone disagree?" No one spoke. "Excellent. Miss Lawson, we'd like to offer you the position of teacher for Copper Creek School, beginning September 1st. The terms are as discussed previously: $30 monthly with accommodation provided." Relief and joy flooded through Rebecca. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson, thank you all. I accept the position and promise to serve the children and community to the best of my ability." Outside, after signing the necessary papers, Rebecca could barely contain her excitement. "I did it. I actually did it." Dane's smile was warm. "Congratulations, Miss Lawson. You'll make a fine teacher. I couldn't have done it without your help." "Nonsense. You earned this on your own merits." He helped her back into the wagon. "This calls for a celebration. Dinner at the hotel restaurant. It's the finest in the county, though that's not saying much." Rebecca hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that very much." The hotel restaurant was indeed modest by Boston standards, but the food was well prepared and the atmosphere pleasant. Rebecca and Dane discussed her plans for the school term, and he offered to help repair some of the furniture in the teacher's cabin before she moved in. "You've done so much for me already," she protested. "That's what friends do," he replied simply, "friends." The word both warmed and troubled Rebecca. Yes, they had become friends over these past weeks, but lately she had been aware of feelings that went beyond friendship: a quickening of her pulse when he entered a room, a lingering awareness of his presence, a desire to know him better, deeper. But such thoughts were dangerous. Dane had made it clear from the beginning that he had rescued her out of a sense of obligation to his sister's memory, not out of any personal interest. And now that she had secured the teaching position, their paths would naturally diverge. It was better to be grateful for his friendship than to yearn for something more. As summer progressed into August, Rebecca divided her time between preparing for the school term and continuing to help at the Yates ranch. The garden flourished under her care, producing an abundance of vegetables that she helped preserve for the coming winter. She also assisted Mrs. Whitaker with the annual putting up canning peaches, making jam, and drying herbs. One warm afternoon, as Rebecca was harvesting the last of the summer beans at the ranch, Dane approached from the barn, leading a saddled Willow. "I thought you might enjoy a ride," he said. "There's a place I'd like to show you if you have time." Curious, Rebecca agreed. Soon they were riding side by side along a trail that wound into the foothills. The day was perfect, clear blue skies, a gentle breeze, and wildflowers still blooming in patches of sunlight between the trees. After about an hour's ride, they emerged from a grove of aspen trees into a small, hidden valley. A crystal-clear pond, fed by a mountain stream, reflected the sky like a mirror. The surrounding meadow was carpeted with late summer flowers, and the only sounds were bird calls and the gentle splashing of the stream. "It's beautiful," Rebecca breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. "I thought you'd like it. Not many people know about this place." "Joe showed it to me my first year here. It's been a special spot for his people for generations." They dismounted and let the horses drink from the stream while they walked to the edge of the pond. Dane spread a blanket he'd brought in his saddlebag, and they sat looking out over the water. "I come here when I need to think," he said, "or when the noise in my head gets too loud." Rebecca glanced at him, understanding what he meant. Though he rarely spoke of it, she knew the war had left its mark on him, as it had on so many men. Does it help? Usually. "There's something about this place that puts things in perspective." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the warmth of the sun and the tranquility of the setting creating a sense of intimacy that felt both natural and new. "The school term starts in 2 weeks, Rebecca said finally. "I'll be moving into the teacher's cabin next weekend." "I know, Mrs. Whitaker mentioned it. I wanted to thank you again for everything. Not just for what happened at the auction, but for giving me time to find my feet, for introducing me to Mrs. Whitaker, for supporting my application to the school board." Dane picked up a small stone and skipped it across the pond's surface. "You don't need to keep thanking me, Rebecca." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Still," she persisted, "I want you to know that I'll never forget what you did for me. Starting my teaching career, having my independence, it all stems from your kindness that day." He turned to look at her directly, his blue eyes intent. "Is that how you see it? As charity?" "No, not exactly. Because that's not how I see it anymore." Rebecca's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Dane seemed to struggle with his words, a man more accustomed to action than emotional declarations. "When I bid on your contract that day, it was about helping someone in need, yes, about not letting what happened to Rose happen to you, but these past weeks." He paused, then continued more softly. "These past weeks have been about something else entirely." Hope flared within her, but she was afraid to trust it. "What have they been about?" "Getting to know you, discovering that you're not just someone to be rescued, but someone I admire. Someone I've come to care for." He looked away, back toward the pond. "I've never been good with words like this." Rebecca's heart was pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "You're doing fine," she encouraged gently. He met her eyes again. "I don't want to complicate your life just when you're finding your independence. But I needed you to know that to me, you're not a charity case or an obligation. You're a remarkable woman, Rebecca Lawson, and these have been the best weeks I've had since before the war." Tears pricked at Rebecca's eyes and she blinked them back. "They've been wonderful weeks for me too," she admitted. "And not just because you saved me from Quinn's brothel." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "No, no," she gathered her courage. "I've come to care for you too, Dane. More than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances." The circumstances have changed. You're no longer dependent on me. You have your teaching position, your own place to live. You're standing on your own feet, just as you wanted." "That's true," she acknowledged, "so perhaps." "We could see where this might lead, slowly, properly." He hesitated. "I could call on you in town once you're settled in your cabin. We could attend church together, perhaps the harvest festival next month." Rebecca smiled, warmth spreading through her at the thought. "I'd like that very much." The ride back to the ranch was filled with a new awareness between them, a sense of possibility that hadn't existed before. They didn't speak much, but the silence was comfortable, filled with unspoken promises. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. True to his word, Dane helped repair furniture in the teacher's cabin and built new bookshelves for the classroom. Rebecca organized her teaching materials and prepared lessons for students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. The day before school was to begin, Rebecca moved into the teacher's cabin behind the schoolhouse. It was small but neat, with the new bookshelves Dane had built providing ample space for her modest collection of books. Mrs. Whittaker had contributed curtains and a colorful quilt, making the space feel homey. That evening, as Rebecca was arranging her belongings, a knock came at the door. She opened it to find Dane standing there, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "I wanted to wish you luck for tomorrow." "You're not intruding at all. Please come in." He stepped inside, glancing around approvingly at what she'd done with the space. "It looks nice, comfortable. It feels like home already." "Thank you again for the bookshelves. They're perfect." "You're welcome." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I brought you something, a first day of school gift." Surprised and touched, Rebecca unwrapped the package to find a beautiful silver bell with a wooden handle. "It's lovely. Every teacher needs a bell," he said with a smile. "This one belonged to the first school teacher in Copper Creek back in '62. Mr. Thompson thought you should have it." Rebecca ran her finger over the smooth silver surface. "I'll treasure it. There's something else." He reached into his pocket again and brought out a small leather-bound book. "This was Rose's, her favorite poems. I thought you might like to have it for your classroom." This gift touched her even more deeply than the bell. "Dane, are you sure? This must be precious to you." "It is. But I think Rose would have wanted a teacher to have it, especially one who will inspire children the way she never had the chance to be inspired." Rebecca carefully opened the book, noting the delicate handwriting on the flyleaf. "To Rose, with love, Daniel." Inside were poems by Wordsworth, Keats, Byron, and others, some with passages underlined and notes in the margins. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll take good care of it." "I know you will." He hesitated, then added, "I was wondering if I might escort you to church on Sunday, and perhaps we could have dinner afterward at the hotel." Rebecca smiled. "I'd be honored." The next morning, Rebecca stood nervously before her class of 24 students, ranging from tiny 6-year-olds to gangly teenagers. She rang the silver bell to call them to attention, and as the clear tone rang through the classroom, she felt a sense of rightness, of belonging. This was where she was meant to be. "Good morning, students. I'm Miss Lawson, and I'm very excited to be your teacher this year." The day went better than she could have hoped. The younger children were eager to learn, and even the older boys, whom she had worried might resent a female teacher, responded well to her respectful approach and challenging material. By week's end, Rebecca had settled into a comfortable routine. She taught during the day, prepared lessons in the evening, and explored the town on weekends. True to his word, Dane came to escort her to church that Sunday and every Sunday thereafter. They would attend the service together, then share dinner at the hotel restaurant, gradually getting to know each other better in this new context of equals rather than rescuer and rescued. As September gave way to October, the relationship between Rebecca and Dane deepened. He would ride into town twice a week to see her, sometimes bringing vegetables from the garden she had planted or books he thought she might enjoy. They took walks along the creek that ran through town, attended community socials, and once rode back to the hidden pond for a picnic. The townsfolk, who had initially regarded Rebecca with suspicion due to the circumstances of her arrival, gradually accepted her as their children came home excited about what they were learning. Her obvious dedication to teaching and her proper behavior always in public, always appropriately chaperoned when with Dane won over even the most skeptical parents. The Harvest Festival in mid-October marked a turning point. The entire community gathered for a day of celebration, with games, music, dancing, and food. Rebecca had helped her students prepare recitations and songs to perform, and their success reflected well on her. As the evening drew on and lanterns were lit for the dancing, Dane found Rebecca watching from the sidelines. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked, extending his hand. She hesitated, only briefly. Dancing together would be a public declaration of their attachment. But as she placed her hand in his and he led her to join the other couples, Rebecca realized she was ready for that declaration. The past was behind her, and her future, whether it included Dane or not, would be of her own choosing. They moved together surprisingly well, his natural grace belying his rugged appearance. As he guided her through the steps of the dance, he kept his eyes on hers, and Rebecca felt as though they were the only two people present, despite the crowd surrounding them. "You know," he said quietly as they turned, "people will talk about this tomorrow." "Let them," she replied with a smile. "I'm not ashamed of being seen with you." His hand tightened slightly on hers. "I'm proud to be seen with you, Rebecca Lawson." As the music ended, they remained standing close together for a moment longer than necessary. Then, mindful of the eyes upon them, they stepped apart and rejoined the gathering. Later that evening, as Dane walked Rebecca back to her cabin, the air between them felt charged with unspoken feelings. At her door, he took both her hands in his. "Rebecca," he said, his voice low and serious, "I need to ask you something important." Her heart quickened. "Yes, would you consider, that is, would you do me the honor of?" He stopped, seeming frustrated with his own awkwardness. Then, more directly, "I love you, Rebecca. I think I have since I saw you standing so brave and dignified on that auction block, refusing to be broken by circumstances. I'd like to court you properly, with the intention of marriage, if you'll have me." Joy surged through Rebecca, overwhelming in its intensity. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I would like that very much." His smile then was like sunrise after a long night. He raised her hands to his lips and kissed them gently. "Thank you, Dane," she said softly. "I love you too. Not because you saved me, but because of the man you are, kind and honorable and good." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished, but Rebecca remained still, her heart pounding as his lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. It was brief but perfect, a promise of things to come. "Good night, Rebecca," he said, reluctantly stepping back. "I'll see you at church tomorrow." "Good night, Dane." As she watched him walk away, Rebecca touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. From the depths of despair on that auction platform to this moment of perfect happiness, it had been an extraordinary journey, and she knew the best was yet to come. The courtship of Rebecca Lawson and Dane Yates became the talk of Copper Creek. They were seen together at church, at community gatherings, and occasionally riding through town. Dane would bring her wildflowers or books when he visited, and Rebecca knitted him a scarf as the weather turned colder. Everything was conducted with proper decorum, but no one could miss the look in their eyes when they were together. November brought the first snow and preparations for Thanksgiving. The school term was going well, with Rebecca's students making remarkable progress under her guidance. She had introduced new books and teaching methods that engaged even the most reluctant learners, and parents were pleased with the results. One crisp Saturday afternoon, Rebecca was surprised by a knock at her door. She opened it to find Dane standing there with Mrs. Whittaker. "What a lovely surprise," Rebecca said, inviting them in. "What brings you both to town today?" "We come bearing an invitation," Mrs. Whittaker explained, settling into the chair Rebecca offered. "My Henry and I host a Thanksgiving dinner each year for those without family nearby. We'd be honored if you'd join us." "That's very kind of you," Rebecca said, touched by the inclusion. "Dane will be there, of course," Mrs. Whittaker added with a knowing smile. And Joe Buffalo and the Thompsons from the school board and a few others. It's become something of a tradition. I'd love to come, thank you. After Mrs. Whittaker had excused herself to do some shopping, Dane lingered, his expression both excited and nervous. I have some news, he said. I've been offered a contract to supply horses to the army. It's a good price and it would mean expanding the ranch operation. Dane, that's wonderful, congratulations. It would mean building a larger stable, hiring another hand. He paused. It would also mean a more secure future. Rebecca understood the implication, a future with room for growth. Exactly, he took her hand. Rebecca, I've been thinking. We agreed to court properly and I respect that, but I want you to know that my intentions are serious. When you feel ready, whether that's months from now or sooner, I want to make our arrangement permanent. Her heart swelled with happiness. I appreciate your patience. Teaching means so much to me and I wanted to prove to myself that I could succeed at it. And you have. The whole town talks about what a fine teacher you are. The school term ends in May, she said thoughtfully. After that. He squeezed her hand gently. After that, we can talk about next steps. No pressure, Rebecca. I just wanted you to know where I stand. Thanksgiving at the Whittaker home was a joyous occasion. The table groaned under the weight of roast turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and numerous pies. Rebecca found herself seated between Dane and Mr. Thompson, with Joe Buffalo across from her. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from local politics to plans for Christmas celebrations. After dinner, while the others gathered in the parlor for music, Dane asked Rebecca to step outside for a moment. On the porch, he handed her a small package. I wanted to give you this privately, he said. Inside the package, Rebecca found a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When she opened it, she discovered a tiny photograph of Dane on one side, the other side empty. The empty side is for whatever you choose, he explained. A photograph of yourself, perhaps, or our children someday, she finished softly, his eyes darkened with emotion. Yes. If that's what you want. It's what I want, Dane. She held out the locket to him. Would you help me put it on? He fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin, sending shivers down her spine. The locket rested just below her collarbone, a tangible symbol of their commitment to each other. It's beautiful, she said. I'll treasure it always. Winter settled over Colorado, bringing short days and long, cold nights. Rebecca's tiny cabin was cozy enough with its wood stove, but she found herself longing for company during the dark evenings. Dane visited when weather permitted, but heavy snows often made the journey from his ranch to town difficult. Christmas approached, bringing excitement to the schoolchildren and a week's holiday. The town organized a Christmas pageant in which all of Rebecca's students participated, performing the nativity story and singing carols learned in class. The event was held in the church on the last day before the holiday break, and the entire community attended. Rebecca watched proudly as her students performed, her heart full at seeing how much they had grown under her guidance. After the final carol, as parents collected their children amid congratulations and holiday wishes, she felt a presence beside her. They did wonderfully, Dane said, his smile warm. You should be proud. I am, she admitted. They've worked so hard. I have something for you, he said, handing her an envelope. A Christmas gift of sorts, though you'll have to wait until spring to fully enjoy it. Curious, Rebecca opened the envelope to find papers inside legal documents. As she read them, her eyes widened in surprise. Dane, this is the deed to a plot of land near your ranch, he nodded. 5 acres adjoining my property. Good land with access to the creek. I thought you might like a garden of your own, a place to build something new. The implication was clear and Rebecca felt tears welling in her eyes. This is too generous. It's not generosity, Rebecca, it's hope for our future. He took her hand. You don't have to decide anything now, the land will be there waiting when you're ready. She looked into his eyes and saw the love there, steady and patient. Thank you. This means more to me than I can express. The winter passed slowly, with Rebecca fully engaged in her teaching and Dane occupied with ranch work and his new army contract. They saw each other when weather permitted, usually on Sundays for church and dinner, occasionally for sleigh rides when the snow was good. By March, Rebecca had made her decision. As the spring thaw began and wildflowers started to appear in sheltered spots, she asked Dane to walk with her after church one Sunday. "I've been thinking about the future," she said as they strolled along the creek path. "About the land you gave me and what I want to build there." Dane's expression was carefully neutral, but she could sense his tension. "And what have you decided?" "I've decided that I'd like to build a life there, with you." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I love teaching, Dane, and I'm proud of what I've accomplished. But I love you more, and I'm ready for us to begin our life together." Joy transformed his features. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying yes. Yes to courting, yes to marriage, yes to building a home on that land." She smiled up at him. "If you'll still have me." In answer, Dane drew her into his arms and kissed her with all the passion that had been building between them over the months of their careful courtship. Rebecca responded in kind, her heart soaring with the rightness of their connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Dane rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Rebecca Lawson. I have since the moment I saw you. And I love you, Dane Yates, more than I ever thought possible." They were married in May after the school term ended. The ceremony was held in the Copper Creek Church, with Mrs. Whitaker, Joe Buffalo, and many of Rebecca's students in attendance. Rebecca wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Whitaker had helped her make, with the silver locket Dane had given her at Thanksgiving around her neck. As they exchanged vows, Rebecca thought back to that fateful day at the auction, how desperate she had been, how hopeless her future had seemed. And then this man, this good, honorable man, had raised his hand and claimed her proudly, changing the course of her life forever. After the ceremony, they rode together to the Yates ranch, now their ranch, where Joe Buffalo and Mrs. Whitaker had prepared a celebration. Friends from town joined them, and the day was filled with music, dancing, and laughter. That night, as Rebecca and Dane stood on the porch of their cabin, looking out at the land that was now their shared home, she felt a sense of completion, of having found exactly where she belonged. "What are you thinking?" Dane asked, his arm around her waist. "I'm thinking about how far I've come, from that auction block to here, a teacher, a wife, a woman with choices and a future." "You did that, Rebecca. Your strength, your determination." She turned in his arms to face him. "We did it together. You gave me the chance, but we built this, you and I." He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise for all the years to come. As the stars appeared overhead and the sounds of night creatures filled the air around them, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning of their story, a story that had started with an auctioneer's voice and a cowboy's raised hand, but would continue through all the joys and challenges that life would bring their way. 5 years later, Rebecca stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching as Dane taught their 4-year-old son, Jonathan, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Rose, clung to her skirts, eager to join her brother but still too small for such adventures. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. Dane's army contracts had expanded, and they now bred some of the finest horses in the territory. Rebecca had continued to teach, first at home to the children of neighboring ranchers, and then, as their own children arrived, focusing her educational efforts on them. The 5 acres that had been Dane's Christmas gift to her now boasted a thriving orchard and the largest kitchen garden in the county. Rebecca had become known for her preserves and baked goods, which often won prizes at the county fair. Joe Buffalo still worked with them, now as the ranch foreman, overseeing 3 additional hands. Mrs. Whitaker visited regularly, though age had slowed her steps somewhat. She doted on the children as if they were her own grandchildren. As Rebecca watched her family, contentment washed over her. The path that had led her here had been unexpected and at times frightening, but she wouldn't change a moment of it. From the depths of despair at that auction to the heights of joy in this life, she and Dane had built together. It had been an extraordinary journey. Dane looked up and caught her watching. He smiled, that same warm smile that had first given her hope on the day they met, and beckoned her to join them. Rebecca lifted Rose into her arms and walked out into the sunshine, toward the man who had raised his hand and claimed her proudly, forever changing both their lives for the better.